Let's now continue building our slider component. And let's actually start by attaching an event handler to a keyboard event so that we can also slide through the slider using the left and right arrow keys. So let's do that after these ones here. And remember that we actually handle keyboard events right at the document. .add event listener. And then we're going to use the key down event. And so that's going to be fired as soon as the key is pressed down. And here we need the event. And let's start by taking a look here at the event so that we can figure out which keys we actually want to use. So I'm going to hit the right arrow key. And so you see that we get the key here as arrow right. And then the other way around, it is of course arrow left. And so I'm going to use that key, arrow left and arrow right. So that's very simple. If e.key equals arrow left, then what we want to do is to call the previous slide function, right? And so this is also a reason why I created a separate function for this. Okay, so otherwise I could also have left the entire code just here instead of exporting it into its own function. I still prefer it like this, but it wouldn't have been necessary. But now, as we need to reuse the same code here as well, then I really would have to create it its own function. Now you might have noticed that here we also could have used like short circuiting. So we could do e.key equal arrow right and next slide. So this would work the same way because of short circuiting, right? At least I hope so. And yeah, it does. So I just hit the right key and here the left key. And so it works just as fine. So you can now choose which version you like the most. So I'm going to leave both here and let you decide which one you want to use. All right, but now about the dots that I was talking about. Let's go here to our HTML because here we actually already have a div, so an element for that. So we have the buttons, of course, these two, and then we also have this empty container in which we're going to create the dots. So let's start by selecting that element, and I'm going to call it the dot container. So that's just dots, I think. Yeah, that's correct. And so let's start by creating all these dots in there. So I'm going to create a new function here. So basically, I'm nicely organizing the entire code of the slider here into different functions. And so that's a good pattern to get used to, all right? So just so you see what these dots will actually look like. So each dot is going to be one element with the class of dots dot. And then it will have this data attribute of slide with the number of the slide that clicking the button will go to. All right. So one more time, the data attribute here holds some data that we need in order to make the functionality work. Let's actually grab this code here. So I'm copying all of it now. And so what we want to do here now is to create one element like this for each of the slides. So the easiest way of doing that is to simply loop over the slides, because then we can do something for each of them. And in this case, it's not even going to be about the slides. It's just so that we can do it 4 times because we have 4 slides. So we have the slide again and then the index. But in this case, we're really only going to be interested in the index. So missing the function keyword here. And actually, since we're not interested in the slides, we can again use this convention of the throwaway variable. so a variable that we don't even need. And so let's now say .container .insert adjacent HTML. So as I mentioned, this is my favorite way of creating HTML elements. And so let's say before end. So basically adding it as the last child always. And then here we need the HTML code itself. And so let me just paste that button, so that code that I copied from the demo site. And now here, all we need to do is to add the index. And so then the first button will get index 0, then 2, 3, and 4. So that in the next step, we can then read this value from here and move exactly to that slide once one of the dots is clicked. So let's check that out. Oh, and of course, we need to also call this function. So in the beginning, we need to call go to slide and also create dots. So create dots. And I will organize this a bit nicer by the end. For now, let's just leave it like this. Oh, and you see, we have the 4 dots now here. All right, let's check them out here just to see the data slide attribute. And indeed, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And now let's actually make them work. So adding another event handler here. And I like to keep the event handlers or event listeners here at the bottom. And so, of course, we are going to use again event delegation. So we're not going to attach one event handler to each dot, but instead to the common parent. And so that is, of course, the dot container into which we just added the dots. So add event listener waiting for a click. And now to actually match the element that we're interested in, we can simply now check for the class. So that's event.target.classList.contains. And then the class of the dots is dots underscore underscore dot. All right, and if so, let's just log that to the console pretty quick. So here we get dot. If we click outside somewhere, nothing happens. And then again dot and dot. All right, so let's get the slide. So const slide is equal e.target.dataset.slide. And so that's because it's called data slide. And so as always, all the custom data attributes are in the dataset and then dot this value, so dot slide. So dot slide. And to make it even better, we can now use destructuring because this value is exactly the same as this. And so we're reading from this object, and so we can simply do this. So another nice use case of destructuring right there. And so now what we want to do is to basically go to the slide that we just selected. And so one more time, it's now very handy to have this go to slide function here inside its own separate function. So go to slide, and then with the slide number that we just read from the dataset. So let's test that. And it works. So slide 2, let's see slide 1. Let's go straight to the last one. And it jumped over all the others. And now we are at the last one. And of course, we can combine this now with the buttons and with the keyboard arrows. And so, yeah, great. This works as well. Now all we need to do is to also show which is the current slide. So activate this dot, basically. So give it this different background color. So that's also pretty common in a slider like this. And let me actually show it to you. So all we do, as always, is to give it a special class. So the dots.active class. So let's go back and let's do that not here, but in another function, because we need this functionality in many places. So whenever we change the slide, we will also need to change the indicator here. So no matter if we click on one of the dots or if we just use these buttons here, whenever we change the slide, we want to change which slide is currently the active one. And so we're going to create a completely different function for that. And let's do it here after create dots. So activate dot. And here we need to, again, then pass in the current slide, basically. So how will we do that? Well, it's going to be a bit similar to what we have here with these buttons. So here we also had like an active class to show which one is the active button here. And to do that, remember, before we activated one of them, we first deactivated all of them. And so here we are going to do the same. So we will select all of the dots each time that we want to activate one, and we will then remove that active class and then add it only on the one that we're interested in. So let's select all the dots. So that's document.query selector, and actually query selector all. And so the dots are the one that have this class. And then for each of them, so let's call it dot. We want to say dot class list dot remove this class dash dash active. So that's the first step of removing all the active classes, and then we will edit only on the one that we are interested in. So how do we select the one that we actually want? Well, we can do that also based on the data attribute. So that's going to be a bit complicated. So let me show you how. So document.query selector. And so here the query is going to be a little bit more complicated. So it's still dots underscore underscore dot, but now we want to select based on the data slide attribute. So basically based on this attribute. And we can create a selector for that. So remember how previously we used these brackets to select for images with a certain attribute. And so here we can do that as well, and even check if they have a certain value. So data slide equals, and so they should have exactly the value of slide. And so then the selected dot we can add to the class list or class. So the active class. Just like this. So let's say we pass in slide number 2. So we want to activate the dot corresponding to slide number 2. And so here in this query selector, we can basically select the element with this class and with this data slide attribute set to 2. So write like this. Okay, and here that's active. And so now that should actually be working already. All we need to do is now call this function here in all the necessary places. So when we go to the next slide, we go to the slide, of course, and then we also want to activate the dot. And also on the current slide. And then the same when we go to the previous slide. Activate dot with the current slide. And finally, when we click on one of the dots. So activate dot, and here it's just called slide. Okay, let's try that. And did it work or not? Well, it's hard to see actually here because of these images. But yeah, apparently it is working. Although it looks kind of the same as all the other dots. So let's change that here, the style. But yeah, it's very hard here. So let me change the class here. So let's actually change it to white. So reactivate this one here. Oh, and yeah, you can see that it actually works. So now that's a bit better visible. So that works just fine in all directions. So even with the arrow, of course. And when we click a dot, then the same works as well. There's just one problem, which is when we reload this, then none of the slides is active. So let's go back here and also in the beginning call this activate dot function with slide 0. So activate dot 0. And so now you see the first dot is now active. Great. So that's actually it. Our slider is working now. Let's just refactor our code just a little bit and make it a bit better. So for example, we have all of these function calls here. So let's put them all in the same function, which I'm going to call init. So an init function, an initialization function. So here we have our event handlers. And then here, our functions. So I'm calling the function that doesn't even exist yet. So that's better. And now I will simply put all of these here, just so that we know a bit better what exactly we are going to do in the beginning, basically, to initialize our slider. And there should be one more. Yeah, that's to create the dots. And that should probably happen before we activate any dot. Otherwise, that's not going to work, probably. So here we have then our functions. Let's just write that here as well. This one we don't need anymore, in fact. And now just to finish, let's actually put all of this code into a function as well. And so this way we do not pollute the global namespace. So that's something we like to say, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this also later in the course still. But for now, just know that it is a good practice to keep this kind of functionality here, maybe in its own function. So let me actually delete this one and just put one curly brace at the very end here. And then all we need to do is to call that function. And that's it. So now we have our slider working, and we could now actually even pass in some values here. And to make this even more complete, we could actually pass in like some options here. So we could make this slider function accept a couple of options. So an object, for example, which contains these options, and then work with that. But that's a bit too much for this example. But just know that this is a pretty common thing to do. So great, this slider works. Let's just actually go back to deleting these slides. We don't need them anymore, and put back our original content. And so you will see then that it works just the same. And indeed, it does. So I'm just going to change the color of the dot back here. And then that's it. So everything works the same, no matter how many slides we have. So of course, now we have only 3 dots, but everything just works the same. So the slider is really being built dynamically based on the number of slide elements that we create in our markup. Okay. So we're almost done with this project now. There's just 2 more small lectures in which we're gonna learn a little bit more. And so after reviewing this code for this really cool component, let's then just quickly check out these final 2 lectures.